Okay. I am going to start the broadcast now because sometimes people can't hear me. Um, and I want to make sure that you can. So, hang on a second here. So let me just pop open my chat over here, make sure I can see it. And whoever's over on the other line can let me know that you can hear me. And the beautiful thing is that these are around for a long time, so it's being recorded and some people can come back to it because we know life gets busy. Candace, yes, thank you. A lot of what I love to do is help people just discover and realize the how and give them a deeper understanding of what's going on with their health or in their life, what and your fears with it. Hi, Heather, yay! And just help them make better choices, which is really what I need myself to know. Let's back up and tell me why this is happening so I know what to do about it. That's my personality. So I like to help other people learn that too and discover it. And it just gives you a little bit more reason and understanding of how to move forward in your life. And I know right now in Idaho, pollens are high and smoke particles are high. People are bombarded with stress with going back to school, with screen time. There's a lot of things that are going on, and I'm hearing a lot more about allergies and swollen lymph nodes and clogged sinuses and our bodies trying to process all the stress that's there. So we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about a couple things that are kind of cool, and it's really your immune system. A lot of people don't realize how much it's playing a role in this, or some maybe do, and how it can be overreactive or underreactive. So we're going to look at that and discover that as well. So I'm going to make sure that you guys can see my screens and me. So I'll probably bump back and forth between these two because there's a couple slides with a lot of information on it that I don't want you to miss, and then other ones that won't really, matter as much, quite honestly, that if you can see it or not. But and if you're uninterested in deep, dark science, then you don't need to know about it. We'll breeze over it anyway and make sure that you can understand it in a really basic way, and which is something that I really enjoy doing. A lot of what we're going to talk about is your gut, your immune system, and your brain, and how to optimize those systems. Not very many people realize that your brain is in control of everything. Everything you think, say, do, taste, smell, touch, everything, every emotion from laughter, happiness, crying, tears, anger has to be processed through your nervous system and into your brain. And we really live our lives, as we say, through our nervous system. And some people have to take a step back and be like, okay, well, why does the brain react in a certain way? How is the information getting there? What's happening exactly inside of the brain? Is there errors that are occurring? Is there negative feedback that's going on? How does this all happen, and how do we receive really a higher quality of life? Because I believe that that's what we all deserve, right? We all need a higher quality of life. We all need energy to be able to give back. The world needs the best of us, especially in these times where stress is high. We need some positive influence that's in our lives, and the best way to do it is get a calm, organized brain, and we're going to talk about that and talk about how to really make sure that all systems are running and firing in all cylinders, and kind of tie a few systems together that you might not even realize are tied together. So we're going to kind of come up into this 30,000 foot view and then work our way down and look at how the brain affects your immune system, your digestive system, and your endocrine system. Which is, something that we're not going to necessarily cover hormones in here, but how it can influence the way our bodies and our brains operate together. Here's a quote that I include this on basically every single one of my presentations, but I love Dr. Bruce Lipton. He's an amazing researcher, and he was the guy that had discovered that a lot of our things that we're experiencing, while we want to blame genes, it's actually the environment we've put ourselves in. So he's the one that discovered epigenetics and the way we turn on genes in our environment, which is why we talk very closely about having a really optimal environment to live in, so that why you might be dealt kind of a crummy hand, you can play that crummy hand really well and not turn on some of those genes that we feel like we might be falling victim to in our lives. And it says, sorry, I didn't read the quote, but it says the function of your nervous system, which is the feedback system to your brain, its job is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all other cells. So when we're looking at the nervous system and how our brain takes in information, it's through our senses. And as you see on there, I've listed more than 5 senses. I know that's our traditional understanding of what our senses are, but that's how we take in the world. And some of the senses we don't really realize are there and missing, and how our brain does receive the information is also enteric. So how you feel internally. How does your stomach feel? How's your heart feel? How's your literally your internal organs feeling? And then also really, really importantly is proprioception, or balance movement. Where are you at in time and space? People don't realize how important that actually plays into your brain, and how much of an energy suck it can be into the brain if you are experiencing poor balance and coordination, if you are experiencing a motor system that's off, if you don't know how much pressure to put on joints when you're walking, if you don't have the coordination and precision that you need to just be able to move through time and space, if you're sitting for too long and your brain is feeling stressed that way, those are really big senses. And when those are off, our brain is off. If you remember when we were itty bitty babies, you probably don't remember, your nervous system does. But when we were very young, and we would check the baby out at a pediatrician or to another doctor's office, they're looking at motor milestones. They're looking at movement. They're looking at, can the brain and the body do this? Then we know that the brain is on track, because it's largely movement driven. And there's a huge division of our nervous system that we miss out on. And it's that motor division that really develops it. Our brain is very mechanoreceptor driven, so movement driven in order to develop. And when that system is off, we will see a lot more systems off. So we're going to look at that as well. A lot of kids that tend to struggle with sensory issues, we know that the senses are off, and they're going to struggle with one or more of these issues, including touch, hearing, vision. But also you can watch them be very off in balance and movement, because their brain doesn't have the right perception of what's going on. And that hindbrain back in your cerebellum and your vestibular tracts has a lot to do with sending the signals forward to the higher brain centers, and that can get really overwhelmed. And we're going to touch on that just a little bit more here in a moment, and how that can get off as well. But when you're looking at the nervous system, it's got 2 modes of operation. And this is where we're really taking that, 30,000 foot view on, okay, we've got the brain, we've got the nervous system, we've got the senses that those nerves are taking in the information, your brain's picking it up. It can only get what the brain's been given from those senses, what it's been given from the nervous system, and make the decisions, the best decisions it has from the information it's been given. So sometimes we know that those senses are off. It's going to digest, receive the information, right? Coordinate the behavior of all other cells and shoot it back off. Well, it's got to be able to do that under a calm state. And often we're not in a constantly calm state. We know that there's 2 modes of operation inside of our nervous system. There is the stress response, that fight or flight response, your sympathetic nervous system. This is going to matter here in a little bit. And there's also your parasympathetic nervous system, resting, healing, digesting, growth, development, which is why infants and children require a lot more rest than we do as adults, because they have a lot more healing and repairing to do. They have a lot more digesting to do. They've probably eaten more food, hopefully, than we have, like especially during growth spurts when we notice that. But there's a lot more going on inside of their bodies. As adults, we need to be able to sleep, be in parasympathetic, with enough of a balance to heal from the stress we've experienced during the day. And some of us experience a lot more stress than others. Some of the stress we can't necessarily help on what's going on. I always say choose your stress wisely. Right now, for example, the air, we can't necessarily choose that in Idaho. We can choose the amount of time typically that we spend outside. Unless you do work outside, then that can really play into a toxicity level that we can look at here in a little bit as well. So I want you to know that these 2 sides of your nervous system, one has to be, when one is on, the sympathetic nervous system, your parasympathetic nervous system is not on. So they're very inversely proportional to each other. And I actually think I might have that on the next slide. So let me just make this kind of big. I'm going to double click here so you can see this and you won't see my face. Nope. Hang on. There we go. I want you to look at this just a little bit more closely. And if you're on a device, you might want to scroll in on the screen, or zoom in on the screen and take a look at what these 2 systems control and how they control it. And you can tell how inversely proportional they are. You can see how they're directly opposite, constricts pupils, dilates pupils. In the sympathetic, your senses need to be able to turn up. Stimulates the flow of saliva, inhibits, meaning slows it down. Constricts, relaxes. You can watch and go back and forth and say, okay, when I'm calm and in parasympathetic and I'm sleeping, I have a slow heart rhythm. Sympathetic nervous system, the first thing to respond is the heart with an increased heart rate and blood pressure. We're also going to slow peristalsis in the stomach. We're going to slow the production and breakdown of fats and hormones, because your brain under stress doesn't necessarily care whether you ate a cheeseburger, whether a virus is in the air. It is just, this is a survival mechanism that should be very, very, short-lived. You should be able to handle the stressful event that's there and turn it off and go back to balance between the two, which is what this is indicating right here. This is a good balance, but when fight or flight's high, parasympathetic is low. And when your parasympathetic nervous system is the thing that's running your immune system, your gut, and your hormones being the first three and most important, they require a lot more energy than many other systems in the body do, then we know that these are going to start to suffer. We know the brain isn't going to get the right feedback that it needs. This is a lot of conversations that I do have with kids with, some sensory issues going on, is because the senses have been turned up so high for so long and the brain's getting bombarded with stress, and it ends up getting stuck there. We say nerves that fire together, wire together. Those nerves and that sympathetic nervous system can start to take over, and we start to see a shift inside of the body. And we experience what's called dysautonomia. Some of us have heard of this term before. Some of us might not have, but your dysautonomia is literally a dysfunction in your autonomic nervous system and everything that should be on autopilot. And I've even had patients come in and say, I've been diagnosed with dysautonomia, which is interesting. It's kind of a generic description to what's going on inside that autonomic nervous system, but it means a sustained state of stress. The body's experienced enough stress for a long enough time that the organs and glands are missing out. When you're in that sympathetic response, the blood is shunted from those internal organs out to the limbs for energy to fight or flee. The brain becomes very just dependent on that chemical release sometimes of the dopamines coming from the stress response instead of a nice calming response. And we'll see people actually trigger their own fight or flight response. The people that are under constant stress, there's always something wrong happening. They're always putting out a fire. There's always just the issue goes, from something you think is really calm to here really quickly. And you might see yourself escalating that quickly, or you might see a friend or your child escalating really quickly. And that's when we know that fight or flight response has become stuck there. And we start idling under stress, and we start experiencing symptoms that are indicative of dysautonomia. And it's not a diagnosis that we put onto people in our office, but it's something that we see as an effective stress. And we want to look and see, okay, you've got some stress that's stuck in your life. Your body has been stuck under fight or flight. You might be feeding this response. You might be unknowingly feeding this cycle of stress. And I'm going to make this large again too. Sorry for the Blair Witch Project that's going on here. But when you look at the three stressors in life, there's a chemical stress, which we're talking about right now, in the things that we are breathing in, but it's also the food that we eat. It's the chemicals we allow inside of our body and inside of our lives, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. Everything is really going to start to feed that stress response. And often when we are under stress, our body just wants a quick fix. It just wants to live on glucose, simple sugars, easy things to break down, because it needs energy to sustain in the survival mode. We also experience a lot of emotional stress during this time. The quarantine and COVID and the changes that are going on and online school and restrictions that we're experiencing has caused a lot of emotional stress, but people have a lot of emotional stress prior to COVID. There's a lot of demands. I just sat down with a teenager today who did a really good job of describing how he's feeling of not really feeling like he can take on challenges because he doesn't do them well. It's kind of a perfectionist approach to life. I'm not willing to do it unless I know I can do that well. I don't want to make mistakes. I'm a little fearful of that. But I said, well, it really sounds like you're riding with some training wheels on. And you said, I really am. I'm driving my life with training wheels, and I want to do all of a sudden the Tour de France, and I don't know how to get there, which is a really good description, because he wants to go to college. He wants to have a social relationship. He wants to do well in school. He wants to do extracurricular activities. And right now he's feeling like he's unable, and he hasn't pushed himself to be challenged there, along with a fight or flight response that's been triggered and not sleeping well. So I'm missing out on parasympathetic. The fight or flight response is running the show, and he feels physically uncomfortable sitting in a car, at a desk. That's part of that movement, that motor division that I was talking about earlier, that your brain experiences stress when it doesn't know where it's at in time and space. But we can also go through physical stressors that we would call, traumatic. And it's not only falling down or getting tackled in football or rugby, or maybe in an auto accident. It's really sitting too much. Our bodies were designed to move. Our brain needs movement in order to be fed and to get feedback. And often we aren't giving our brain that. We're sedentary. And now we've got stress that's built up inside the system. And the outlet for that stress can either be emotional or internalizing. And sometimes we'll just sit on the boob tube, and watch television. We're going to watch Netflix all night, because that's going to keep up with our level of stress, those flashing lights and emotions that are going on there, instead of allowing our bodies to physically get it out. Or some of our gamers that will sit on a video game and let that keep up with his brain, but physically we're not keeping up with the brain. Instead, we're just trying to numb it through some other sort of stimulation, and that gets to be a problem, and that gets to really stress the brain out. Let me see if I can click back through here. And you guys are probably wondering what the big red word is here in the middle, and the interference, irritation, inflammation. We know that cycle causes that. That big red word in the middle is subluxation, and that's when we know stress has been stuck there. That's that fight or flight response that's stuck on, and that's something that we take care of in our office when we're adjusting people. We are adjusting for a subluxation to remove the neurological interference that's there, and we do it based on data. Not only do we take in the information from somebody on an intake and having an evaluation with a doctor, but we want to know neurologically, where are you truly at? And we have tools to measure it. And this is one of the tools that does measure it. I'm going to make this big again so you guys can take a look at it. It's really going to measure how far you are idling. This test is taken at a state of rest, where you should feel calm. You should feel a balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. If you remember that teeter-totter analogy that I just showed on there. Here's our graph. And when you're idling 3 minutes at rest during this test, and your heart is indicating to us you are feeling stress, when your skin conduction on the galvanic metal is indicating your body feels tense and stressed, we're going to see a shift at ease, right? While you're sitting there calmly, your body feels like it's under a state of stress. And that's when we know we're going to have some dysautonomia. That's when we know the autonomic nervous system is going to be under pressure and missing out on the parasympathetic and some of the things that it really, truly needs in order to heal and repair. I know I haven't talked about allergies yet, but you can start to see how stress can start to interfere with autonomic nervous system function, and that immune system being the number one system in the body outside of the digestive tract that needs a lot of energy in order to operate. And when you're stuck under fight or flight, your body doesn't necessarily care, like I said, that there's a virus in the air, or that there is a cheeseburger you need to digest. It is under survival. And really, when you're talking about allergies, it's an overactive immune system. So I'm going to show you that here in just a moment with this analogy. And let me just see if I can blow this up a little bit. And then I'm going to go back down so you guys can see my face. What a lot of people don't realize about the immune response is that your immune system has two different modes of operation. they have a Th1 and a Th2 that are once again inversely proportional to one another. When one's on, the other one's not. So we've got a system here, sympathetic, fight or flight, parasympathetic, and an immune system with two different responses, Th1 and Th2 response. And the Th1, let me just bump over here to the next slide, and I'm probably going to have to, or you guys can, if you're on a screen, you can probably see this. If you're on a phone, you may not be able to see it. But the way that I describe a Th1 response is really your externalization or your firefighters that come to put a fire out. It's a very generic response. It is saying something got in, we need it out. So that might include vomiting, it might include diarrhea, it might include a fever, it might include a rash, a cough, a sneeze. There's a lot of mechanisms in your body that will help you get whatever it is out of the body. And often you don't need to read, the rest of this stuff. I actually have this slide in my immune class that I do that we really get into more of what's happening inside of the body and what specifically what cells are responsible for it. But the biggest thing to know is that this is the firefighter response. This is the get it out response. This is the externalization response. And you're going to see it a lot of the times on the skin. A lot of people will experience allergies or an immune response where it's like, ooh, that looks like a virus. Ooh, it looks like you ate something that your body, wasn't ready for, didn't like. We're going to see it there. And there's a lot of patients who will come in because of this specifically of my body's not processing something well and something right. I've got, constant swollen lymph nodes, or I can't handle seasonal allergies, the pollen's in the air, and, my body can't function, my nose is dumping. We know that Th1 system is struggling, and to take a look at just even how the patient is responding to stress is a big deal, but also what we're doing to either increase that Th1 response or decrease the Th1 response. Because often when we're sick, we're told to, let me just bump over to this next slide, and we'll talk about Th2 here in a moment. We're told that it's not good and we should shut it down. So I'm going to go back and forth between these two slides, but we will start to take fever reducers, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, anti-vomiting, anti-diarrhea, cough suppressants, antihistamine, antacids. You know the things that we do to turn off that response, but it needs to be able to be challenged to grow. Just like I was talking about with that teen, he never kicked the training wheels off, he never skinned his knee, he never let his body learn anything new, and now he feels very insufficient for the future. Where your immune system is the exact same way. Your immune system is also needs to work. It needs to try things out. It needs to not be shut down because it, if you remember, is trying to get things out that it believes should not be there. Now, let me go back to this other slide that I was looking at before. Your Th2 response is really the inspector. It's now something came in, our body responded to get it out, and it's going to do one of two things. It's going to make some memory cells to that response and antibodies. So when somebody's saying, oh, I have the antibodies for that. This is popular right now during COVID. Do you have the antibodies for COVID? Have you been exposed to it? You can also run an antibody titer test is what that's called. They'll run that on expectant mothers. I know I had that with my first pregnancy. What are you actually immune to? They're looking at an antibody. They're looking at what has your Th2 system done. Has it been able to respond to this? Have you experienced it? If you have, you might have a little bit of an army to something if you've been exposed to it artificially through an injection, or have you been exposed to the natural thing, and is your body making a bigger response? Because really your immune system is going to respond the way that it needs to. It's going to respond to a little virus a little way. It's going to respond to a real threat a big way. And you're going to make antibodies, memory cells to whatever that virus is that entered inside of your body. And when it can do that under a natural, actual exposed immunity, you haven't shut down Th1, you let Th1 run its course and activate, because it's going to tell Th2, hey, we need an inspector here. Here's what happened. and allow the Th2 and that natural cascade of events to happen, now Th2 is going to come in there and say, okay, here's what we need to do, friends, and here's the army we're going to need for next time. And they've got about a 10-year half-life. That's why you hear people say, well, it's not really a lifelong immunity, or you'll have a lifelong immunity. You have a 10-year half-life, and it's going to depend on your army size. That's why they'll do boosters, because you had a tiny army, and they need to remind that tiny army of what that threat was and keep reintroducing it. And over time, this is what we're going to see, hang tight, is an immune system that has been overactive on Th2. When Th1 isn't working, Th2 will become hyperactive. And this is where it can start to make mistakes. And this is where immune responses and allergy responses live. This is something that can be related to autoimmune conditions and or allergies that your body is actually attacking and reacting to tissue that it shouldn't. So I know that I didn't fully understand this, because a lot of people will be like, oh, geez, you're just having an allergic reaction to whatever it is. What you don't realize is there's different allergic reactions. There's different ways your body responds. Sometimes you think you're allergic to something because you had that histamine reaction and your lips swollen, or maybe your chest was tight and you were unable to breathe. And they don't realize that there's some foods that your body can be intolerant of that's going to throw up inflammation and interference, and it might not show up for 3 days. And those are 2 different responses. You've got IgG, IgA, and IgE responses to things. And those are different antibodies that are going to respond. And there's different ways to approach that. And of course, people that have the full-on, histamine reaction to things, we're going to say absolutely avoid that. There's some people that don't know that there's silent killers inside of their body, that they've had an underactive, I've turned down and shut down my Th1 response. I haven't let anything run its course. I've only stimulated the Th2 response, and now it couldn't get anything out. And that Th2 response starts getting overactive and can turn into autoimmune. It can turn into allergies and attacking tissue that it shouldn't, instead of attacking the actual foreign invader that really is foreign and really doesn't belong there. And a lot of people, I know that I have this creepy face on here of this little boy, but often when people come in, you can see what internalization looks like. It looks like things that don't move really well. It looks like sinus congestion. It looks like nasal congestion. It looks like throat and swallowing congestion. It looks like constipation inside of the gut. It's everything that you're holding on to because you haven't let the toxins out. And there's a lot of people who think, okay, if I just cover up this symptom, then I'm okay. If I just don't eat this food, then I'm okay. If I just, take whatever it is, Miralax to get this out, or I take an antihistamine to get this out, that they're still shutting down a natural response to their body instead of taking care of the issue. And sometimes you have to go back up to the top, which is why I started with the brain, the fight or flight response, the way your nervous system works, the way how it can interfere with the immune system, and the way the immune system works, and how all of these can get imbalanced, and how we can look over here in under this little microscope and say, oh my gosh, I have this allergy to this one thing, and not realize all the things that added up to it, all the stressors that added up to it, including our guts just being unable to process things appropriately, which is what I want to talk about with another big piece of this puzzle, which is your vagus nerve. And if you remember way back on the pictures that I showed you about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, as a matter of fact, don't watch too closely. I want to go back to it so you can get a good picture of what that looks like. Right here, let me blow this up a little bit. Your parasympathetic nervous system, you can see there's not very many nerve roots running that show. There's one huge plexus down here, and there's one very large one right here running all of these organs and glands. And then you've also got some pieces of cranial nerves that are up here. And then in the sympathetic, you can see just how many roots and branches there are of that. And the reason I'm going to show that to you is because this big nerve right here that's running the show is actually your vagus nerve. So if you've heard people talk about the gut-brain connection, the brain-gut connection, something that runs that parasympathetic response it's the vagus nerve. That's the one that they're talking about. That's the one that usually the tone is off. There's restriction there. The gut and the brain aren't getting the feedback. The parasympathetic nervous system isn't working appropriately. The sympathetic nervous system is taking over, and this vagus nerve has been understimulated and underutilized. Your vagus nerve, I'm trying not to go too fast here, is that brain-gut connection, gut-brain connection, however you want to call it, that people are talking about. But it's one of only 2 cranial nerves that do exit the cranial vault. It comes next to your first cervical vertebra, has 9 times more fibers than any other nerve in the body, and something that we are stimulating during our chiropractic adjustments. A lot of people will have a vagal nerve reaction because we're freeing that vagus nerve up to do its job, to run the parasympathetic nervous system. And sometimes what that looks like is externalization. It's that externalization response where people are like, oh my gosh, I got adjusted and I'm just, my kid's crapping his brains out, or they started draining out of their nose and sinuses, or they started maybe even vomiting. We've had that as well, where your brain and body are finally connected. Your vagus nerve is finally able to use the stimulation to the brain and get the feedback that it needs from all those internal organs that it wasn't getting, and make good judgment calls to say, I need this out. And why some people might say like, oh my gosh, that's really scary. Wow, I didn't know my body would just like let go of everything. And by the way, sometimes it can be emotions, and it can be kind of, traumatic. Or some people like, gosh, my kid or my baby didn't stop sleeping after they got adjusted. They just fell asleep in the car and slept all night and woke up for breakfast. That never happens. Can it cause acne? Heather, I don't know when you asked that question, but absolutely. Your skin outside of your liver is the number one place that toxins can be released. So when your body is feeling inflamed or under stress, it's going to come out the pores. It can also be part of that toxic response. I know we've had conversations too about, food stressors that might be there, but that's one of the things that we definitely see is acne. We also see eczema. We also see just little skin bump rashes on people. We see just pore complexes. We'll see what we call like a little rosacea look, which is a little inflammation along the face right here. That's red. That's an inflammatory response to something that your body is not responding well to, usually something that you're eating that your body is now, started to attack. And sometimes it can literally go all the way back to when people say, well, I have leaky gut, I'm reacting to everything's causing inflammation. We're looking way back in infancy when you're designed to have a leaky gut. We want that breast milk to go through there. It is the natural piece of it, but sometimes unfortunately, we're unable to do just breast milk, and we added in formula. And if you look at formula, it's not just cow's milk. There's a list of this long of things that are included in there, and that gets through the gut and can start your body saying, oh, this foreign invader shouldn't be here. I should attack it. And now when you have it later on in life, it wants to attack it. So yes, definitely it's something that we see in skin clearing up. I even had a little girl. I've had teenagers with, the acne as well. And part of, choosing your stress wisely also. That's what we talk about. I had a little girl that was 10 years old with severe eczema to the point of she only wore long sleeves in the summer because she was embarrassed of how it was covering her body. And her mom, she's like, I was coming in here for her behavior and her focus and knowing she had some neurological stress there, but I didn't realize how much it was coming out, trying to be externalized in the skin. And one of the first things to clear up was her skin, and she was ecstatic that she could wear a bathing suit. She was 11 or 12 years old, and she'd never done that because she'd been so embarrassed of her eczema. But a lot of what we look at in the body is what's interfering with the healing process. What's our body trying to tell us? Symptoms are telling us something's off and something's wrong. And rather than just covering up that symptom, we say, let's go back to the source of like what could truly be causing this neurological interference. What could be interfering with the body from healing? What's causing that fight or flight response and not the parasympathetic response in the way that we need it, which is a pretty big deal. And I know most of you have seen this. I'm gonna increase the screen as well. Just kidding. That's my face. Here we go. I can double click. There we go. a lot of you who've been in the office have seen this fuse box before, where we look and say, okay, here's the brain, here's the nervous system, the spinal cord, here's all of the organs and glands. And I know this doesn't look super clear right now to you guys on the other side, but we look at, okay, where is there some effective stress? And some people are like, Jude, I checked every single box that was really, in this upper cervical spine. Well, we know the vagus nerve lives up there, and we know it's responsible for a lot of autonomic nervous system activity. Also, when you take a look at allergies and congestion, ear and sinus infections, tonsillitis, strep throat, I don't even know where it is all on here anymore, but difficulty sleeping, anxiety, ADHD, epilepsy on the spectrum. There's so much that's happening in that upper cervical spine, that brainstem, and it's so important that it's clear from interference. That vagus nerve can exit appropriately. Here's the brain kind of flipped upside down, and it's listing off all of the cranial nerves and looking at your vagus nerve and where it exits right on the brainstem. This one and this one leave the cranial vault. This vagus nerve, this one does, rotation in the head and neck, which is why we get into torticollis and colic with kids. And inability to nurse. But anyway, this vagus nerve exits along right next to this first cervical vertebra. So here's the brain stem has to fit inside this huge cervical vertebra here. And it's lying now on its side. It's right here. Here's its little wings. And right next to it is where that vagus nerve comes out. And there's a lot of restriction that can occur in there. And a lot of what we see in our patients is that dysautonomia, but that stress that's there. One of these scans is a thermography scan looking at the stress that's there. And I picked this scan in particular because this is a little boy who was having such severe reactions to gluten that he couldn't even eat meat from an animal that had a grain. And it was just absolutely insane. He would vomit, he would have eczema, he wouldn't sleep through the night, it would cause night terrors. There was so much inflammation going on inside of his body. And this was a mom who was doing the best she could, and dad, of feeding this child really well, of removing all the toxins in the home. They use essential oils. They were eating all organic. They're like trying to eliminate all of the stressors in his life. And yet he was having an inability to focus, and he had a very traumatic birth, which is really usually where it happens, is there's stress during the pregnancy, movement wise or birth wise, or even sometimes just emotional distress from mom. We start to elicit that fight or flight response within us, which kind of sets the stage for our kids because we're feeling that stress. I know some of you know my story about Landon and how much stress I felt like now looking back I was under while I was pregnant with him, starting a new business and moving to Idaho where I didn't know anybody. I came sight unseen. There's a lot of things happening while I was pregnant with him that I just didn't realize. He's getting my hormones, he's getting what I'm feeling, and I'm kind of setting the stage here for his fight or flight response to continue to be activated. And that's really what sent us down this path because of his learning struggles and his vision and speech and all the other things that we wanted to help him best. And after going to several specialists, we found a chiropractor that had been doing this over a decade for neurological stress in kids. And I wanted to know how. I wanted to help not only my own kid, but all these other children who are struggling from really severe issues that were going on. And this little dude in particular that I'm talking about in this scan, he can now come in contact with gluten. He can accidentally eat gluten. The family will know through his stool and sometimes behavior, and sometimes lymph nodes might be swollen when he's getting adjusted. It's like, ooh, maybe you got something you shouldn't have. But the amount of dysregulation that was going on inside of his body was so severe that his vagus nerve was it was so shut down that his body was just making so many mistakes and errors, and it finally started to heal up. Not only that gut-brain connection, but also calm and relieve his body, organize his brain, let him sit in front of, or sit in a classroom with other students and learn and feel comfortable in his skin and sleep through the night, not wet the bed. All the things that he was experiencing, parents unknowing that it was so related to this and related to his stressful birth. is originally where this had started. So he was a really good example. I also had another family of 2 little twins, and one of them was having an anaphylactic reaction. Like they were going to the hospital. That's how bad it was to so many foods. And she tries things that she'd already been eating, and it was over and over and over again. And just a rash where she couldn't even keep a diaper on, and the family just didn't know what to do. And he said, well, I remembered what Dr. Christie said about the other twin that was in, about there's got to be neurological interference in our bodies making mistakes. Our bodies were designed to self-heal. They're designed to self-regulate. They're designed to be healthy. I need to get her evaluated too. And she started eating all the foods her siblings were eating. They started worrying about the reactions that were going on inside of her body, and her attitude improved. So that's a bonus for everybody in the family, right? But it's really amazing, seriously, what our bodies can do to be self-healing and self-regulating, to really to have the best life experience is why we are here as chiropractors, why I think we're humans, that we can give the best back to our world, that we can self-heal our bodies, that we can self-regulate, that we can have energy to do things that we want to. And yes, there's physical limitations of matter. There's some people that'll ask me this, which is why I have this here at the end. Some people will say, well, how long is it going to take? What's going on? Can I fully recover from this? And it depends, right? It depends on the age. It depends on how long it's there. It depends on how severe it's been. It depends on what caused it. But this picture I'm going to show you here is, and by the way, if you guys don't follow Harvard Center on Developing Children, I'm sure if you're interested in it, like I am, you would love it, but if you're not, no big deal. But they had looked at, okay, our body's ability, or our brain's ability to change, and how high it is. Here's the age across here, how much of an ability it has to change. And it decreases obviously with age, but we can still see that there's still some change that can occur, and then just the amount of effort that's required to do it. So this chart is a really good indicator of, how long is it going to take, what's happening. But then also for us, it depends on how severe it is. It depends on what our neurological scans say about it. And really, there's a lot that can depend, but that's why we put people on a care plan. That's why we base it off of, here's the neurological stress that's there. We're going to reevaluate you every month to make sure your nervous system's responding how it's supposed to. Is it responding emotionally, motor skills, autonomic nervous system, vagus nerve, are all the things kicking on so that your body can heal? And we also do ongoing care for patients for well care, because we know stress is going to always be there. We're always going to have stress, but it matters how we respond to it. It matters how our body adapts to it. Instead of continuing to trigger that fight or flight response, we have a stressor, our body handles it, and it turns back off, and it goes to that balance, and our parasympathetic nervous system can do its job. But also that we're feeding it well, we're putting ourselves in a good environment, we're choosing our stress well, and allowing our bodies to do that. So I know that was a lot of information, and I know that some of you that are on here are already patients in the office, or have children that are patients in the office. But if you're not, and you want to know what's going on inside your body, you're looking for ways to help not only maybe allergies and food allergies, but emotional components, behavior components, a way to click on the offer on the bottom, and it's $100 to come in to have those neurological scans, to sit down with a doctor, for them to be able to evaluate it, and then sit down with you and say, here's what we're finding, and here's what I would suggest for a plan moving forward. So click on that, and make sure that you've got your best life experience, and that you have more energy to heal and give back to others. I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for tuning in.